and Omega. This is the first time the monogram of Christ is used as a primary feature on an ancient coin. And it was used for propaganda purposes. It was used because the last son of Constantine the Great, Constantius II, in the year 350 AD, is out there and he's battling. And there's a guy and his brother, Magnentius and Decentius, are in the western part of their Roman Empire. And they're saying, you know what? Magnentius and Decentius are saying, we're bigger, better Christians than Constantius is, and here we're going to prove it. We're going to put on our coins, that's how important it is to us, we're going to put Christ's icon form right there on the coin. We're the better guys, follow us. Constantius, about 6 months later, had a whole series of coins that came out, even bigger, that had the image of the Christogram on it as well. And Magnentius and Decentius were only around about 2 years, and then let's just say they were no longer around after that. The very first time, and people often ask me, the very first time that the image of Christ is shown on a coin, to date, what we have, this is a unique piece. It's the Marriage Solidus of Marcian, okay? Probably a value, you know, it's the only one, and it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is not that coin. Just want to make sure you know that. I'm not handing that one out. But you can see here that Christ, with what we call a cruciform nimbus, that's the halo with a cross behind his head, is standing in between Marcian, who is the Roman emperor, and his queen, Pulcheria. And this was probably a gift given to the significant people that came to the wedding. It would have been a coin that would have been a presentation saying, hey, thanks for coming. It was your gift for showing up, okay? And probably there were silver coins that were struck that were given away to the next tier down of people. But this is the only coin. It's a unique coin. It's in the Hunterian Museum in Glasgow, in Scotland. And it was struck about middle of the 5th century AD. But there are coins that we have with the image of Christ on them. Around the time, 16 years ago, many of us were a little bit antsy about Y2K. I went out and got extra cash from the ATMs. There were people that built shelters and stocked up on food and water. There were people. We're relatively intelligent folks. And yet, 16 years ago, at the time of the second millennium, that's easy for you to say, millennium, we were out there and we were anxious about the transition overnight from one millennium to another, even though it probably isn't really the millennial change year. But go back 1,000 years before that and put yourself into the minds of the leadership of the Roman Empire, now located in Constantinople, the city of Constantine. What we know is Istanbul, Turkey today. But John I Zimiskis, who dies in 976 AD, he says, you know what? I've been putting my image on the coins for a long time, but I was thinking about Mark 12 the other day, and the Pharisees questioning, and Christ basically saying, you know, render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and render unto God that which is God's. I don't think I want my picture on the coins, because I believe that Christ is coming back after a 1,000-year reign in heaven. I think Christ is coming back. And I don't want my image and inscription on those coins when he comes back. So what does he do? He creates a coin that has the image of Christ on one side. The inscription says Emmanuel around the outside here. You see this little IC, XC, either side. That is a short form for Jesus Christus, the first and last letters in the spelling of Jesus Christ. And great image of Christ. We all know that Christ would have walked around with a jeweled book of the Gospels under his arm, right? Obviously, it's a little bit non-timely, okay? So, What we do know, though, is starting at about 600 or 700 years after the time of Christ, the Byzantine icon form of the Christ Pantocrator, which is an art form image of Christ, looks just like this. This would probably be the most highly recognizable imagery associated with Christ at the time of this coinage. In fact, today, if you go into a Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox, any of the Eastern Orthodox churches, you will find this icon form front and center in that church. And on the other side, there will be an image of Mary in the Virgin Orange pose. And on the opposite side of that, and both of those will be slightly smaller, the other side of that, there would be the saint associated with that particular parish or that particular church. So this is the most recognized form of the image of Christ at the time. Well, let's take a look at what else is going on in this coin. Mark 12. He says, whose image and inscription is on the coin. It says, Jesus Christus, Basileia Basil. Jesus Christ, King of Kings. Whose inscription is on the coin? Whose image is on the coin? This is the image and inscription of Christ. Every bronze coin struck by the Roman emperors in Constantinople for over 120 years, through the transition in the millennial change, for 120 years, there were 13 different varieties of these coins struck with slight variations in them. Sometimes an image of Mary, sometimes a floral cross, sometimes a three-line inscription. But the idea was that Christ was put into a place of honor in anticipation of his return in that short period. Now, I do want to say that the gold and silver coins of the same era typically had the image of the king on them, of the emperor on them. But often they would be with Christ crowning him or the Virgin Mary giving him accolades. But the idea was that for common man, this piece of propaganda showed, yep, we're Christian right down to our coinage, and here's the proof. I've got one more coin. Just got to find it here. Of course, the last one. When I was looking for a way to reach middle school kids, I really wanted to get a hook. Because, I'll tell you what, 20 years ago, and now, maybe even worse now, it's darn hard to get their attention. Darn hard. And one of the shows that was on TV back then was CSI. In fact, I think it's probably still on TV. I never honestly really watched it much. But I felt that if I could work with kids of all ages and have them self-discover, have them through the process of hands-on understanding, it might be an interesting way to do it. So I would come into a youth ministry meeting and I'd make a friendly bet with the local youth minister, and I'd say, I'll tell you what do you have here, 45 kids? Okay. They're all just running around. I've got an hour to talk. They're all running around, and I'm saying, he said, do you want me to introduce you? I said, no. Do you mind? I will get all of their attention. I'll get all of their attention, and I won't say a word. The guy says, oh, I'll take that bet. I'll take that bet. I know my kids. My kids are hellions. You ain't going to go there. You're not going to get that. So I said, okay, we'll do this. So I reach in my pocket, and I pull out a roll of fresh struck pennies. I would have gone to the bank that day, and I would have gotten the date on the pennies, I know, is all 2016 or 2015 or whatever the year was. And I start off the meeting by breaking open the roll, just stand in the front, and I throw, and I hit the kids on their head with the pennies. And I'm just throwing. And I throw, and I make sure everybody's got a penny. I might throw a small handful out, and so they're all pennies out. And I reach in, and I pull out a nickel. And I throw that. A dime. A quarter. A $50. A dollar coin. Everybody hates the dollar coins, okay? Then I reach into the other pocket. And I snap a dollar bill. And I wad it up, and I throw it. I am starting to get a little bit of attention. The $5 bill. Snap, snap. Roll it up. Throw it another way. I'm getting a lot more attention. The $10 bill. Roll it up. And Lan's smiling because she's been there when I've done this before. I throw it out. And now they're thinking, who's the crazy guy they brought in to talk to us tonight? Then the $20 bill. And the $50 bill. And the $100.
Oh, glory.
When a $100 bill is up like this and I'm poised and I'm getting ready to throw it, as you might imagine, every single person, adult or child in that room, has eyes on me and is not saying a word. And I look it over at the youth minister and I say, see, gotcha. So, when Luann was in there that one night, I said, you know what, I'd really like to get those bills back if I could. Just throw them back up here, because I got a mortgage payment to make. And I always get the bills back. But the only coins they ever lost were the little coins. But there's a reason why I did that, and it's pretty obvious. I wanted to get their attention in an interesting way and talk about money. And so we talk about money, we talk about some things, both the relative values and maybe the lack of values in today's society about, this money thing, the root of all evil. We'd tie some scripture into it. But eventually that night, I would flash up a coin like this, and I might have a little presentation thing. I generally did. Those days I didn't use this kind of projection, but I would say, look, I got this coin here. Can you help me figure it out? And this is a coin I'm circulating right now. And on this coin, I've got a couple interesting things. I've got this tree. And I'd say, what kind of tree does that look like? Hell, it looks like a palm tree. You're right. And in the Carolinas, it's even more evident. But it's this funny kind of palm because it has these little clusters of dates. This is a date palm. This is one of the key symbols of the Jewish cultural heritage on the coins. So this coin, without having any icon form of a living, breathing, I use that, even though we know that trees are breathing objects, they didn't see that. So this is a Jewish coin that has date clusters on it, and it's a symbol of the Jews. And it has of the year, the L, and lambda, theta. Iota, kappa, lambda, 10, 20, 30. Theta was 9. In the 39th year of the reign of, Chi-Rho of Caesar. Year 39 of Caesar. At that time, it was the great Caesar Augustus. This coin is dated to very specifically what we know as the year 9 AD. So my question becomes to the kids, how old was Christ in the year 9 AD? And I get all kinds of answers. I said, 9 AD, that's 9 years after death. He wasn't even alive then. It's a trick question, Mr. Wood. And I'd say, well, not exactly right. In Latin, AD stands for Anno Domini, or Year of Our Lord. So they'd say, well, it's the 9th year of our Lord. He was 9 years old. And I'd say, well, it's a bit of a trick question. Because in the mid-6th century, there was a Russian monk who screwed up the calendar system. Trying to fix it, he screwed up the calendar system. And he missed the birth year of Christ by, we don't know for sure, but 5 or 6 years probably. So it turns out, now when I go back, Christ was likely born in what we know as the year 5 or 6 BC. We know from the nativity account in Matthew that Herod was alive, and we know from the slaughter of the innocents, the massacre of the male children under the age of 2, maybe significant, maybe not, in that region, that Herod was greatly afraid of the power of this new king, this new Jewish king. And if the case was that in the year 5 or 6 BC, in AD 9, Christ would have been 14 or 15 years old. Earlier tonight, I gave you each a penny. Would you please dig those pennies out of your pocket now, and don't yell it all out at the same time. But when I say go, I want you to jump up and I want you to yell how old you are or were when that coin was struck. I was just kidding. Remember, I put all the kids in. But I was looking to see who actually reached in for the pennies. I know what the answer is. because every one of those pennies was that current year. So they reach in, they look, and they all get ready, and I say, go, and they all jump and yell and get their yayas out, and they're all saying, 13, 14, 15 years old. And I just let it sink in for a second. And then I listen, because every time I've done this, one kid will always say, oh, Christ was the same age we are when that coin we were talking about was struck. And the ability to transport the kids into a mindset of the antiquity of our faith and the ability to suspend the disbelief that is common among kids, not necessarily of all ages here, is magnificent. And the ability to now add context and content and character to the discussion becomes all the more great. And so this is the kind of way that through a little bit of time, and I've taken a little bit too much time here, as I often do, my wife will tell you. I'd love to open up to any questions. If you have, I've taken more time, and you may have things you have to run off to. I don't have any problem with that. If you want to stay longer and ask questions, please feel free. If there are open questions now, please feel free to address them to me. Sir. Say again?
The dies?
The dies were typically made out of iron, okay? And because they understood how to anneal and harden metals, they could actually make the dies last. We feel probably somewhere, depending on the metal that was being struck, striking gold coins, they would last longer than if they're striking bronze coins or silver coins, okay? But the idea here is, though, they felt they could get, from what we see in die studies today, 10 to 20,000 coins struck in silver and 8 to 12,000 coins struck in bronze from these dies, and perhaps more in gold, okay? It's a good question. The other thing is that the hardness of the coin you see out there today is much harder than when it was struck. They actually went through thermal and chemical processes that would make the coin more hard after it was struck. So they would go through annealing and hardening, because once you struck the coin, you'd want the blank to be soft when you strike it and hard when you circulated it, so it would maintain the icon or the image form on there for a longer period. It would remain in circulation as a viable piece of coinage for a longer period of time. Good question, though. Thank you. Ma'am, in the back?
Some of the coins, the image on them way off center, is that an indication of sign of all?
It's a great question. Let me repeat the question. She noticed that many of these coins, these were not perfect. They were not well centered. In fact, sometimes the images are halfway off the reverse. And the reason is, these coins are hand struck. Imagine 4 slaves, typically, in a group making these things. They are not really meant for quality control standards to be really high. They're basically said, you're going to make so many pounds of gold or silver today into so many quantity of coins. And as long as you don't really screw up the face of the emperor on the one side, keep it on the coin kind of, you're okay. As long as the weight, the fineness, the basic uniformity of the coin is correct, you're pretty good. And they do try to get them centered, but these things are probably held with tongs in and around the die, or they're set into place and then somebody puts the handheld thing over. The idea of being able to get perfect centering on these, when you find very well centered coins, it's exceptionally good. Most of the coins I've tried to pick are reasonably good examples, but those that have poor centering are probably really badly executed in general, okay? Thank you for addressing that question. Sir?
When there's a transition between one government and the next, what happens to the old coinage? Does it continue circulating in the new time?
Excellent question. The question is, when there was a transition in government from one king to another king, or from one culture to another culture in a region, do they keep the same coins in circulation? And the answer is typically no. Typically, the king would draw back in, just bring in all the coins, and they would either realloy it if they wanted to change the relative value, okay, or they might just take the old blank coins and anneal them or soften them, okay, and then restrike them with their own icon forms and dating system and all that on it, and then put them back out into circulation again.
And if I have an old coin and go to the marketplace, it's out no longer has value.
Realistically, everybody kind of knows that it's all about the intrinsic value of silver and gold and bronze in the coin itself. So there would have been a clear period of time when there would have been acceptance. In fact, some of these coins that you see here would have been maintained in circulation. The widow's mites, for example, struck in the 1st century BC in bronze, are used as small change in transactions for as much as 300 years, because the Romans didn't strike small bronze coins for local use. We see them in hoards as far north as Eastern Europe and as far south into North Africa and Eastern Africa. So it's a great question. Does that answer the question for you? Sir?
Who decided way back that gold should be the most expensive? Bronze, is it the amount? Who came up with the idea that gold is the best?
The idea of gold and silver and bronze being the intrinsic value base came from the relative rarity of these things. Okay, and gold, actually, silver enjoyed a much more dominant relative value in the ancient times than the gold. Now, its relative value, it still was only about 1/20th the value of gold. But today, the difference between gold and silver is huge. Okay, it turns out though that for adornment, for pure, just the rarity of the metal as a means of exchange, just like today, it has